Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. The first PCC forum of the spring semester. I will watch my feet. Before I introduce our guest tonight, I want to tell you about our lineup this semester. We have a lot of really unique speakers, new speakers, and they will be presenting in a unique way. First is Joanna Macy on February 14th, Valentine's Day. She will be speaking in an event that will be co-sponsored by the Wisdom 2.0 conference that is happening on the 15th and 16th of February. The week prior is being called Wisdom Week, and Public Programs here at CIIS is inviting the participants in that conference to come see Joanna and see what PCC and CIS is up to. So we'll have a confluence of new faces joining us on the 14th. Following Joanna Macy will be our own Robert McDermott. He's going to be speaking to us on spirituality and education. Then, on March 14th, Randy Oxier will be visiting us from Southern Illinois University and to speak to us about Josiah Royce, the American philosopher, cool. And utopian communities. He's sort of going to give us a history of the utopian movements, especially in the northeastern United States. And it is appropriate that this event, Randy's talk, will actually not be at CIIS. It's going to be co-sponsored by the Art Institute of California, and they're going to host it at the Walter and McBean Galleries, which is located in the Marina. So we'll give directions to everyone's, so you know how to get there. They actually have an exhibit by the artist Francis Cape that's called Utopian Benches. Francis Cape has recreated models of benches that were built by utopian communities all across the northeastern United States in the 19th century. So Randy's going to lecture to us in the lecture hall at the Academy, or at the Art Institute, and then we'll move to the benches for discussion.
Interesting. On the benches.
On the benches.
We can discuss utopianism while sitting on utopian benches.
So it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you can join us then. And then on April 25th, our own Becca Tarnas will be presenting to us on J.R.R. Tolkien and Carl Jung's Red Books. They both activated their imaginations in these giant journals, including beautiful images and wonderful explorations of the unconscious in their own unique ways. So she'll be sharing some of her research on that with us on the 25th. And finally, we're going to end the semester on May 9th with Rick Tarnas and Brian Swimme, who will talk to us about radical mytho-speculation and the possibility of a second axial age. So that'll be a lot of fun, obviously. Okay, now, awesome. No further ado, we have here Theo Badashi, who's a student here at PCC, of course, and while he's been doing his studies here, he also found some time somehow with several others, Max and Missy, and Luthia and others, to put together a wonderful documentary film. They're going to be going to Australia in just a few weeks to premiere the film at a film festival there. Theo was the writer and host of this documentary, and his research of late has been focused not only on new energy technologies but new communications technologies. And you know, what better example of the way that the advances in technology and communications technology, what better example of how much power these technologies have given to normal people. You know, they used to say that the freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. And now we all own the equivalent of a press. You know, the internet has given us all the capacity to voice our wisdom and share our understanding of the world. And Theo is one of the shining lights of that new movement and that new possibility. So Theo is going to talk to us tonight about evolution, technology, and the future of consciousness. I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us.
Cool.
So
all right, thank you.
Please welcome Theo.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So first of all, I absolutely need to thank all of you here. This is a really perfect size group of people. All of you could virtually be anywhere in the world right now, theoretically anywhere in the universe right now, and anybody watching this on YouTube, you can be watching anything right now, and you're watching this right now, so that's really cool. So why would any of us be interested and excited to talk about the role of technology, the human relationship with technology, and essentially what is this thing that we call technology? Why would we even be interested? Well, I think if you're anything like me, you've probably had a bit of the realization that we are in an incredibly unique time as a species, as a culture, as people in this room right now, and kind of witnessing all these things that are happening in front of us right now. My dear friend Max is always saying to me, like, this is our time. Like, what is this time right now, and what are we going to do with it, and what's the significance of this time? And so, for me, I really began to think about this significance when I was young, when I was growing up. I grew up on the central coast of California, amidst beautiful rolling hills of oak trees and creeks and ferns. And so I had a relatively magical childhood. I kind of grew up in the middle of central coast, what's now wine country, but it wasn't wine country growing up. It was really kind of the middle of nowhere. We had one stoplight in my town, and that came in when I was like a junior in high school. So in reality, I'm a small town guy. But on the same token, in that same way, my mother was a flight attendant, my father was a pilot. So they always had this kind of global perspective on things. They'd been traveling around the world from a young age. They helped my brother and sister and I kind of travel to various places that we wanted to. And so we were always coming to San Francisco, like this hub of California, because my grandmother and grandfather were living here at the time. And so I kind of had this interesting childhood in which I was deeply immersed in nature on a regular basis. Like nature, my kind of inner fantasy world was really rich and really, really strong. Grew up reading a lot of kind of fun, like choose your own adventure and fantasy books and all these things, and playing computer games, video games, role-playing games, these creative outlets to me that really kind of helped me to expand upon my creativity. And for me, the world between like my computer and eventually the internet and then the forests and the trees, to me it wasn't really two separate worlds. I kind of had this synthesized reality in which it made sense to me that you would, on my computer, I would create something really elaborate and something fun that I was really excited about. But then I'd go out and take these walks into the forest, and I'd be thinking of these things, and I'd take these realities out with me, and it would just extend. I'd go on these adventures, and I'd go on these missions, out in oak trees, and I had some sort of like major significance of these little things I was doing when I was 7 or 8 years old or whatever. And so it wasn't really until I became older that I began looking around, and it really kind of hit me like the importance of the moment that we're in. I actually remember the internet. We didn't get the internet in '92, we got the internet in '93. And it was like, it wasn't even 1.4 or 14.4. It wasn't even that type of thing. It was like before that. I think it was balsa wood, balsa wood with a little mouse running inside of it. It was like early internet, And I mean, my most fond memories of the early internet were getting kicked off of chat rooms when we first discovered chat rooms with a bunch of friends, and we wanted to see how far we could push the envelope. So anyway, yeah. So I've kind of had this lifelong fascination with technology. And growing up in a small town, we virtually had one TV channel, and it was NBC. And so I grew up watching Star Trek and Saturday Night Live. And so I had this kind of like, this rich comedic perspective on life that my dad kind of helped introduce us to. And also I had this very futuristic perspective on a lot of things. And of course other media that was, diverse and rich. But when it comes to the actual shows and stuff we were watching, I was watching these fictional futurist realities, human realities, that it made perfect sense that that in future humanity, it's based upon justice and dignity and this sense that we can all move towards our self-actualization, and to support us are these advanced technologies. And that within government, within economics, I mean, obviously Star Trek has transcended our economic system. They're more of a resource-based economic system in the Star Trek fictional future. But you know, I was kind of watching these cultures that found it very simple to use advanced technologies to really accentuate the essence of what it means to be human, to go around the universe and to, you know, have justice and democracy and fairness at the heart of what they do, but also use these advanced technologies as a way to solve the world's problems, make the world better, educate people, educate everyone, feed everybody. Pretty radical ideas that I think in the future of humanity won't be radical whatsoever. They'll be so commonplace that we'll actually look back at this time right now as a really dramatic turning point in which we said, wow, we were still carrying these older ideas that were very specifically based, you know, and cultivated from empire and cultivated from imperialistic consciousness and cultivated from scientific materialism, reductionist consciousness. You know, and I really see that we're at this turning point, you know, as Joanna Macy likes to say, and you know, Paul Hawken and others. You know, I really see us that we are at this great turning right now, this powerful turning point that is allowing us to really revision what it is we do. You know, our relationship with everything, our relationship with democracy, with the internet, with our technologies, with food, education. So anyway, so you know, needless to say, from a young age, I've really always had this fascination with human potential, with human suffering in particular. You know, I kind of jokingly say I had my first major like existential meltdown when I was probably 8 or 9 and going into 10. You know, kind of like Sean Kelly. Well, I don't know about that age group, but you know, Sean and I have, and you know, and Jahan and other friends who, you know, maybe we woke up too early, too soon, you know, and maybe a lot of us go through that. And in doing so, you know, I was asking really serious questions about my life and the nature of human suffering and really the world that we're living in. And I, you know, it took me a few years, a long, long time, really, you know, over a decade, to really kind of understand even the questions I was trying to ask. You know, I was looking out at the world, and I was looking at racism and militarism, and even when I began to really understand capitalism for the first time, and when I was in my teens, I was like, you know, I was kind of living in a fantasy world of capitalism up until I realized that I was in this world that's people label capitalism. And it kind of blew my mind the amount of inequality and injustice that is actually like embedded in that type of a thing. It like was mind-blowing to me because I was living in this fantasy world futurist thing where I was only trying to see human potential. Like, oh my God, humans are amazing. Yeah, we have problems now, but we're evolving into something absolutely incredible. And so, you know, I had kind of a big wake-up call, probably when I was around my early teens. And, you know, like a lot of youth in this culture and throughout the world, there wasn't really very many safe outlets. So I chose whatever was around. I chose ingesting whatever forms of chemicals or substances I could find, which eventually led me to psychedelics, which was probably the most incredible personal spiritual thing I could have done. And then so it was at that time that I began to, you know, take kind of a different position on technology itself. I began to look at technology not just as the things that we create, but really as anything that can magnify consciousness. Okay, so when we're talking about technology, or when I'm talking about it, in the whole philosophy of technology, there's a whole wide spectrum of things that technology is. Okay, so let's just real quick kind of just like look at a couple definitions. You know, so ultimately, we'll say that there are two major things that we'll say that we really can say technology is. One are like the artifacts that we create, the artifacts or structures or systems whose sole purpose is essentially to magnify consciousness, to be an extension of consciousness, to be a magnified feedback loop of consciousness, right? So our earliest tools, a lot of historians really believe that language and tool making were our first real forms of technology. And then a lot of, you know, kind of technology critics think that when we began to use language and tools, I mean, essentially it would have been language first and then tool making, that really kind of marked our major split, or we could say the fall from the Garden of Eden, when we began to actually abstract the things around us, when we begin to develop layers of consciousness between immediate experience and immediate reality, you know, being like this nut I'm trying to crack open, and then being the ideas and the actual execution technologies of me trying to crack open that nut. You know, and so layers of, we could say abstract layers began to develop. And then essentially we can say that really a major part of the history of technology itself is just a further extension of the number of layers between us and immediate experience. You know, I mean, phenomenologists would say that there's a lived experience within every one of those experiences, you know, but like, for example, my relationship with this podium right here would probably be very different if I had built it myself, you know, versus if I had known someone built it, versus if I had known nothing of even how the trees were grown that allowed for it to be created. So we can actually see there's very different types of relationships that we can have when we become closer to the origin of the things that we create, right? So this is kind of like, you know, a philosophical issue, you know, like how is it that we're going to be relating with technologies? So if we say that the first kind of category are the things that we create, and technology magnifies consciousness, that's essentially its sole function in our evolution. The second aspect of technology, I'm going to draw from the technology philosopher. His name is Kevin Kelly, and he was the former like Wired magazine editor-in-chief. Really interesting character, and he has a really beautiful story. He's a bit of a technology cosmologist, you could say. He tells these beautiful stories and visions of technology and the history of technology. But he uses a label called the technium, and he says that the technium essentially is anything that is created by humans, but it's also the actual expression of technology itself and the whole entity that is technology. He even goes on to say that he believes the technium marks its own like phylum. It becomes its own living thing. It's not alive in the sense that we would consider it alive, but that it is a natural phenomena, we could say, that it's like an inherent part of the universe. And so, anyway, you know, I had been kind of grappling with these different ways to look at technology and understand it. And one of the things that I found as I was kind of exploring this whole debate is that there are essentially like maybe three major like positions that are really prominent in the world right now, in the West right now, in regards to our relationships with technology. So we could say that there are the technologists who are really kind of the product of the Western scientific consciousness, whose real mantra is progress, right? You know, all this technological development for the sake of progress. And so really, if you ask a technologist anything, they're going to say, well, technology is going to be the answer for it, give or take, you know, and here's why. And so they're really kind of like these ardent supporters of technology. The end game of the technologists are the singularity movement, essentially, which, you know, is this philosophical movement that really envisions humans fully synthesized with our technologies, our advanced technologies in the future, to where we'll eventually transcend these physical bodies and become ghosts in a machine, an actual machine. And so that's a bit of a radical perspective, but that's the end result of the technologists. And then we could say that there are the naturalists who say, well, no, technology is actually, you know, it's severed our relationship to nature. It's severed our relationship to ourselves. It's inherently oppressive. It's the reason why there are so many problems in the world, because things have become so abstract and so objectified. And so a lot of the naturalists are very, you know, anti-technology in that sense. They might use basic technologies, but the idea of these advanced technologies is just really fearful, and to be, you know, we need to take a few steps back. And then so we could, I've kind of distinguished another group which I call the synthesists, or the synthesizers. And, you know, it's not, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'm actually drawing it on the idea of a synthesizer, essentially, too. That, you know, if you look at what a synthesizer is, it's a this beautiful instrument that's completely designed based upon an incredible classical piano that has been brought into the digital realm, but the actual interface with it is kind of like between the line of the digital and the analog. And so in the human form, I think synthesizers are probably really most of us here. I think most people that are trying to find that healthy edge could really consider themselves synthesizers. Those of us who love using the internet, or at least see the internet as an absolute gift to our species, something that needs to be fought for and preserved and protected and cultivated for its best capabilities. Those of us that use electronics to record things. Those of us that use computers to communicate things. Those of us that are really thankful for the cars that we get to drive and essentially want to create these harmonious living environments, these harmonious realities in which our technologies are not these oppressive, highly polluting things that in a sense they are brought back down to a natural realm and used for the actualization of our entire species, our entire planet, and all beings, the actualization of all beings involved in the food chain, the web of life. Another phrase, we should try to remove the food chain. You know, it's funny, these things that we carry with us from industrial consciousness. The food chain, as if everything is just a food thing, you know, byproduct of consciousness. And so, I've really spent a fair amount of my life just trying to understand our position and really how it is we can move forward successfully as a species without going towards annihilation or without also going towards what we would consider techno-fascism, which is probably, you know, what a lot of people think that we're headed towards. And so this is really a big issue because, first of all, as a lot of techno-philosophers kind of make clear, like we're only actually having these conversations now about the nature of technology. So what I like to consider the time that we're entering into is that, you know, Teilhard de Chardin really, one of his major philosophical contributions is this idea that humanity becomes the point in our earthly evolution in which the evolutionary process itself begins to reflect upon itself as part of this evolutionary process. You know, so in that sense, we are part of the unconscious manifestation of the universe and the evolutionary trajectory becoming conscious of itself. And so it's an actual shift from the unconscious to the conscious. You know, and what's really fascinating is Carl Jung and you know, a lot of other psychologists really make a similar assertion that in order for us to really understand our humanity and the problems that we are and that we're facing, we need to make our shadow side, we need to make our interior exterior. We need to symbolize the things that are in the processes that are going on within us so that we can develop relationships with them, so we can actually begin to embody our shadow side and not let the shadow rule over us. So in a sense, it's possible that this whole technological thing that we have as a species it itself is moving into a phase in which humans are becoming conscious of its own unconscious tendencies. But also, it's possible that it's actually becoming alive, that it itself, this technium, is itself becoming conscious of itself, you know? And this is kind of crazy, but, you know, once we actually make successful forms of artificial intelligence using what appear to be algorithms now, but we don't understand the depths of this, you know, this is actually pretty radical because if we see that the universe itself has a natural tendency towards life, then maybe it's actually possible that with enough intelligent algorithms that something might happen. And then, you know, I would rather take the position of us talking about it as a possible hypothetical than us saying, oh no, there's no way our algorithms could ever become conscious. Because we see life, you know, spontaneously emerges as much as it can, wherever it can, you know. And so that's another thing is that the technium itself actually might be moving into a phase of being conscious of itself, you know, which is really interesting. There's a lot of implications for that. And then so it's, it might go through a similar process in some way as we're going through right now of us grappling with what it means to be human, what it means to actually be conscious of our own humanness and our own responsibilities, and the fact that we are actually one of the many flower blossomings of this massive 14 billion year thing, this entity that we call the cosmos. That we have a specific role as a character, as a certain function of this cosmos. These type of realizations in some form might be had by our technologies eventually, So anyway, it's really interesting. There are a lot of very similar parallels between what we would want to call like this is so funny because all these technologists and all these people who are really into science and in total suppression of spirit and consciousness, or really they want to reduce consciousness to pure matter. That's the big scientific, we're trying to crack the code. God does not exist. Consciousness is only matter coming together. I can't prove either way, but it's an interesting position that they have. And so it's really fascinating because there are all these different arguments that the scientific community has, that the philosophical community has also, but in different ways. Like for example, if I were to tell you all, or let's just play a little bit of a exploration for a second. I'm here to convince you that all of this is a fabrication, that none of this is actually real, that each of us are participating in some sort of an illusion in a sense, that I might think this is here, but this is actually really not here. There's something else that's going on, and I may or may not even be here with you all, but we are all having this experience together that we are here, okay? So if I were to make that proposition, what would you guys think about? I mean, what would you think, Jahan?
I think it's freedom. It's a little freeing, kind of boundless. There's no constructs to like hold me anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of free fall, but there's so much possibility within that.
I mean, have you heard the argument before?
Yes.
Where have you heard it?
In my own mind and growing philosophy circles, growing up.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good movie.
Yeah.
Like The Matrix, essentially, right? Philip K. Dick, totally.
René Descartes. Yep.
Descartes, okay. I mean, and that's, okay, so we just, yeah. So the point of it is that on one hand, that's a really kind of popular up-and-coming philosophical argument in the science community amongst several different schools of thought and different sources, because they're drawing it from this idea that as they try to measure matter, it becomes more and more pixelated the closer down into the most rudimentary particles that it becomes. So if we zoom further and further in to anything physical around us, it becomes pixelated, the way a video game would become pixelated. We're actually finding this as evidence, right? And so it's funny because as philosophers and mystics and theologians, we've actually been having the same type of philosophical conversations for thousands of years. Theologians and mystics have been saying, is all of this just a projection of this single God mind of the universe, the psyche of the cosmos? And if so, are we, in a sense, just dream characters, these unconscious dream characters, living in this singular reality, this dream of God, essentially? I mean, I first began learning about that argument when I was reading the kind of 20th century American occult classic, The Kabbalion, which is it's kind of a Western Hermetic occult classic. It's a great book, 1908. It was published, and it's just a great little treatise on Western occultism. And so that's one of the things that they posit, is that all of this is existing, in the mind of God, the mind of the all. And so I'm bringing this up because I think that it really underlies a major point. I think that those in the technology movement and those in the consciousness movement are actually looking for relatively the same things. And I think that what I'm witnessing, what I see happening right now and then extending into the future, is more of this kind of cross-pollination, more of this synthesization, essentially, of where we let science do what they're really good at, and science kind of like humbly says, well, we're kind of lonely in this reductionist materialist thing. Maybe we should bring everyone else in on it so we can actually have a holistic conversation about things. So there's humbleness on all sides, but I think we're seeing more and more of these, a new wave of thinkers and mystics and youth who are not afraid to embrace our scientific materialist, Western roots, but also, who are exploring with psychedelics, who are exploring with consciousness research, and who have even delved into archetypal philosophy, archetypal astrology, that really, and depth psychology and all these things that really, really go beyond what we would imagine as the limits of human consciousness. And so, I bring up those points because it's really interesting to me that essentially it seems that we're all looking for similar things, whatever school of thought there is. And so to me that's exciting because I see that eventually coalescing into a culture that we are respectful to all the different perspectives involved, and there's a singular purpose of just trying to figure this whole thing out. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is that this concept of a completely ubiquitous presence of life throughout the galaxy, throughout all of the universe, not just this galaxy, but throughout how many galaxies do we have now? Hundreds of billions at least? Like it just keeps growing. Like I can't even say how many there are because next week it's 100 trillion now, Jesus. So, we'll just say trillions. It's a lot, whatever it is. It's ridiculous, right? And then infinite stars, and around each star, who knows how many infinite other celestial bodies. So when I'm kind of walking around the city or walking around my life, I feel kind of mixed feelings about being here, about being on this planet. On one hand, I am just so enamored by humanity. I am just like totally stoked about humanity. I walk around, and even just people doing these little things, people riding their bike to work in the wind, or people taking their kids to farmers markets, and just like the expression on kids' faces when they see like a huge thing of produce, like bright red produce. It's just like the most magical thing. And these little magical things are happening all around us all the time. That's just in the human sphere. I walk out sometimes and see all these birds, and you listen to them, and then you can fully hear they're having these like elaborate conversations that are going on, and it's just like this richness that we get to experience when we choose to open ourselves to those experiences. And so on one hand, I have this constant presence of this total love and admiration for humanity and for all this life on our planet, and then on the other hand, I walk around and I just I see a lot of the just really the flaws involved in the design of the way that humans have created things, and it's just really, really apparent to me when I think about it. When I look around and I see humans and all these things, and it just becomes really clear that we are not really it. Like we're a part of it, but we're not quite it. Sitting in Brian Swimme's class, and we're talking about the whole evolution of the galaxy. And the whole evolution of the universe, and the evolution of all these multiple galaxies, and supernovas. I mean, supernovas are freaking incredible. What's up with a supernova? A massive sun that makes a bunch of other suns and it blows up. That's fucking awesome. It's amazing. So our little sun is a byproduct of this bigger sun that blew up and stuff like that. And so I have all these explosions and all these things coming in together, and then all these matter and clouds and all these, eventually solar systems forming, around these stars and all these things happening. And then, we would go through all these processes that last billions and billions of years, and things that are just phenomenal in the sense that life comes forward just through repetition. When the right conditions are formed, you give things enough time, you let things spin around each other long enough, and then life just comes forward. It is absolutely mind-blowing. And, and in that, I look around at humanity and the things that we're at right now, and I was like, this isn't it. Like, yes, this is it, but this is not it. Like, this is one little bit of the it. This is one flower on the cherry tree. This is one little blossom that's happened. And so I prefer to take the position that life is absolutely ubiquitous throughout the universe. And I really feel that as we, I think that the things that we choose not to see stop us from seeing a lot of things. And the things that we're afraid of giving validity, you know, really have prevented us from seeing potentials, or even might prevent us from being open to potentials. And so, and I mean, you know, there's good reason for there to be so. You know, when the axial age kind of came forward and really did its best human attempt, and we could say divinely inspired attempt, to give humans meaning, and then say, oh, we're gonna, you know, we need meaning. We've fallen from the garden. There's a fragmentation going on, you know, that we all feel. We need to reconnect to this deeper spiritual presence that is very real. But what happened was, over time, humans kind of fucked things up as usual, and overly systematized things, and then overly politicized things, and then reduced things to the symbol and not what's behind the symbol, you know? And so we kind of lost the essence of what that was. And then in doing so, we had this whole undercurrent of radical mystics who are the first scientists, who were had a really deep relationship with spirit and a deep relationship with consciousness. The Rosicrucians, you know, the Renaissance thinkers, infinite science, you know, if you look at Einstein's spiritual perspectives and his, you know, his relationship with God and stuff. And so it's almost like when this religious endeavor overly politicized everything, the scientific revolution came forward as a real revolution to liberate consciousness and to liberate the political apparatus that had been developed around us. But what's interesting is that the nature of empire didn't really change. And so it went from religious empire to materialist and modernist empire, essentially, you know. And so we kind of kept with us a few of the major tools of social control, of this idea of reducing everything down to the most controllable form. And in doing so, you know, there was this radical revolution against anything spiritual, against anything that is not provable, you know, peer-reviewed in a scientific environment. You know, so somebody's lucid dream now became their insanity or whatever, or somebody's deeply spiritual practices became things that were untestable, therefore they were untrustable. And so I think that we've kind of inherited this really strong kind of fear of the unknown that we've kind of re-embedded in everything unconsciously, you know. And right now we're in the process of, you know, I mean, how amazing would it be if mystics and spiritualists and those of us who really want to understand what consciousness is and what the nature of reality is, not just through the lens of a telescope or not just through, you know, a microscope, but we want to bring that kind of magical consciousness into the scientific endeavor, and we want to bring the scientific endeavor into that magical consciousness while maintaining the sacredness of both and the respect of both, you know. So anyway, I think that's kind of something that is really fascinating about the potentials that we have as a species and as a culture right now. And so, okay, so what would that mean? Excuse me. So if we really want to understand where we're at right now, it's really difficult to necessarily blame technology, to blame even capitalism, to blame, you know, the 1% or whatever, on anything on most things that we want to blame them on. I think humans, you know, we're really kind of quick to try to find really simple answers, but I don't think things are so simple. I think that, in a sense, we're a very young species, and we are, you know, we're really just beginning to kind of figure a lot of different things out for the good. And so when I look around us and I look at our current technological endeavor, one of the things that is really clear to me, and I think this is actually different amongst a lot of other species in the universe and that have developed in the scope of the cosmos. One of the things that happened that I think that I kind of tapped on in a talk a couple months ago in Brian Swimme's class, is that it seems that as we fell from the Garden of Eden, something really dramatic happened on a lot of different levels. So a major disconnection from nature happened, and that really I'll speak for the West because that's all I can really understand, but most of Western history feels, from the religious perspective and definitely from the scientific perspective, as if it's a regaining and a reclaiming of something that was lost, right? And I don't necessarily think that this is a common phenomena throughout other parts of the universe. I think that something that would happen with humanity could be a very, very uniquely human thing. But on the other hand, I think that humanity has also following certain evolutionary trends and evolutionary patterns that are totally common amongst other advanced species throughout the galaxy and the universe. And so what it appears to me is that as we've entered into this era right now, it's not that we have technology to blame. It's that we are entering into a highly advanced technological state while still under a post-traumatized condition, a collectively post-traumatized condition. That essentially, really maybe even going back thousands of years with a lot of the religious oppression that's occurred. And this idea that religious institutions have consciously permeated human collective psyche with ideas, with methods of control, which in a sense I consider them energetic extraction techniques. That when you make somebody reliant upon you, and you make a large body of people, if we could actually see the morphic field or the quantum field of that population, we could see that the major authority characters that exist, that are overseeing all of this, are actually drawing, usually through fear or through whatever it is, they're drawing energy in a psychic quantum way from the population in which that has absorbed their programming, And so I think that we're entering into a highly technological phase while still suffering from feudalism, post-feudalist consciousness, while still suffering from imperialistic consciousness, essentially. Suffering from the consciousness in which we are considered property of somebody else, that we are owned by somebody else. So I've kind of really been thinking about, like, how did this happen? So imagine humanity first being, a field and just one animal in the whole scope of evolution, right? And then whatever occurred, something really traumatic. I've speculated with Brian before, maybe our planet itself experienced something really traumatizing. We have no idea. Maybe something like a meteor, or maybe something really, really deeply emotionally traumatizing. I'm not going to humanize our planet, but maybe something really dramatic happened to our planet that for a period of time, all the animals on the planet became incredibly highly defensive, and humans emerged and gained consciousness while in this really defensive state. And then so maybe all of early culture and early civilization was humanity experiencing totally unconsciously really, really deep post-traumatic stress, and then the initial governing body emerged as those people who were willing to facilitate suffering in a way that others could not. That essentially we created our oppressors by suppressing our collective suffering. And then over time we actually forgot that even occurred. So the kings and the pharaohs and even way before pharaohs, tribal warlords and their posse basically became unconsciously addicted to this idea of always having to be the protectors at the suppression of everything that's gentle or sacred, or and then so anything, if the community was expressing something they needed to experience, art, spirituality, then those things became almost political tools. And I'm talking unconsciously. I think very rarely, until we get to places like the Catholic Church and other actual political entities that are probably very directly, cultivating our suffering. And so, what I see is that I believe that this trend towards advanced forms of symbolic expression are universal. I think that humans, given every every type of condition that, you know, in which is possible, I think all major species or all major planets or star systems eventually produce something kind of similar to us. But what's really interesting is that I like to speculate on what would a species look like if the fall never occurred, if we never got disconnected from nature, but they still had environmental hardships that required them to make tools and forms of advanced communication, you know? And so when we talk about what the future of humanity looks like, what I see occurring right now is that humans are becoming more and more in tune with the quantum field of consciousness that's around us. And I think if we actually enter into a phase that, you know, in which more of our latent and inherent psychic abilities begin to emerge, what I see, how I see that happening is that people just become more and more empathic and in tuned towards the feelings of others, first of all, that we actually begin to feel each other more. And this actually goes along with Jeremy Rifkin and Jeremy Rifkin's ideas of the emergence of a global empathic civilization. That with new technologies and new forms of communication, people are able to gain access to other people's feelings. And then it really rehumanizes the other. It rehumanizes those in other tribes and other cultures and other parts of the world, just by seeing that we're all going through the same suffering and joy and human stuff that we're all going through. And so what's really beautiful about that is that once that's established, the internet is also empathizing our relationship with animals, you know, to whereas years ago the idea of a slaughterhouse was just kind of like, okay, whatever, that's fine. But we're seeing more and more people actually having these deeply emotional relationships with non-human entities, mammals, fish, you know, all these really profound things that are happening. And a lot of it is coming through the internet. And then once that shift occurs, then it's almost like you can't really go back. So what I'm seeing is a larger empathization, we'll say, it's a strange word to say, of humanity with our relationship with everything else. And so I think that that's actually what technology really is. I think that technology is not just buying shoes or having surveillance over activist groups or having a global police state or reducing everything to commodity. I think those are all byproducts of a type of consciousness that we've inherited, that we're working really hard to heal, and this healing process is actually going from the unconscious to the conscious. And what I see technology really being is ways to communicate. I see it going back to its primitive forms of expression. You know, if language first emerged as my way of saying, this is my internal reality, I want to share it with you. And at first it had a primal sound to where when I evoked that sound, it activated that within you. And you would start to cry, you'd start to laugh, or you would feel the same joy, or you would feel the fear of a predator, or you'd feel the excitement of finding a new water supply or an aquifer. You know, there's that primalness to language that I think that has always been intact, and I don't think we're ever going to lose it. And so what I see is that the potential is that our technologies eventually come back around and they re-inhabit the primal realm. They re-inhabit the natural realm in ways that actually reconnect us to what it means to be human, to what it means to be mammals, to what it means to be living organisms that live in communities, that live in these networks. And so, with all that said, I'm incredibly positive and optimistic. I think that we are at a powerful turning point right now, and essentially, as we successfully move beyond techno-fascism, which is going to be a big deal. It's a really, really big deal right now. Anyone who understands exactly what's going on, it's the biggest thing we've ever actually had to face, I think. Basically, behind the scenes are the same political conditions that created World War II, but now we all have to face it. And it might not erupt in the same way, but the underlying consciousness that has essentially tried to dominate humanity for the past 10,000 plus years is now really trying to take itself to a whole new level, at the same time that our collective human capabilities are the strongest they've ever been, ever. And so average people are more empowered. We are more spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically intelligent in various ways. You know, it's arguable. But I think that when it comes to actually potential and capabilities, I think average people, through the internet and through various forms of communication, through this idea of like the self-education movement that we're all kind of growing up as a part of, the self-empowerment and human potential movements, I think we have that on our side, and we have this collective transcendence and movement towards goodness. And I don't think it's a mistake that at the same time that this sort of, our shadow has manifested itself in the most frightening forms imaginable. But, you know, so there's this really strong tension. But ultimately, I see this as part of a many thousand-year process that is finally coming to a head, that once we break through this, and it might take generations, it might take a few hundred years. Maybe it'll take 1,000 years. We don't even know. We have no idea, you know, how long it's going to take. But when you look at a 4.5 or 4.7 billion year process, which is our Earth, and then you look at 200 years or 500 years, I think we're doing okay. I think that we're at a turning point right now that no matter what we see in our lifetime, if we recognize, I believe, if we recognize where we're actually headed, then we can really face the suffering, and we can face our shadow, our collective shadow, in ways that can really empower us, that can remind us what it is that we're actually doing, and can really give us hope for the fact that someday humanity is headed somewhere absolutely incredible, in which we re-embody our shadow through play, through fiction. You know, it's okay to have a dark side. Let's play with that dark side. Let's just not let it become a fascist apparatus that is doing, you know, these things against our will. So if we come to embrace our shadow and learn to play with it and love it, and then we reincorporate that type of holistic consciousness in all the technologies that we create, I genuinely see that we're headed towards somewhere absolutely amazing. So that's kind of all I wanted to share with you guys.
Thank you.
There's always things we could talk about the logosphere eventually. We could talk about all sorts of stuff. But does anybody have any questions about anything?
Well, let's use this microphone
Oh,
for questions so that we get it on the
cool.
video.
I didn't really prepare it for anything. That's what I've been thinking about all week.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not for the PA, it's for the...
Oh, okay. I'm wondering if you're aware of Elizabeth Sather's work around imaginal cells. She's a molecular biologist, and she talks about the transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly.
Yep.
And how the DNA structure of the caterpillar is an entirely different DNA than the butterfly DNA.
Yeah.
And that as the caterpillar begins to cocoon itself, these imaginal cells of the butterfly DNA begin to emerge. And initially the caterpillar's DNA sees those, the caterpillar's, immune system sees those imaginal cells as threats.
Wow.
And kills off the butterfly DNA. But as we all know, the caterpillar is going to become a butterfly whether it likes it or not. And as the butterfly DNA cells began to re-emerge bit by bit, they begin to link together and form chains or form structures that initially or eventually the caterpillar DNA is fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
And disintegrates essentially into this sort of pool of mushy goo, and the butterfly DNA links more and more together, becomes stronger and stronger until the butterfly forms and emerges.
Previous DNA and all the nutrients.
Yeah. So I feel like that's on a very, and I look at that a lot when I think about what's going on our planet. And that's a very time-lapse photography, I think, idea of what we're taking thousands and thousands of years to do, but I think that your approach to optimism is spot on. We know that part of our work as humans is evolution, this idea of conscious evolution, and so anything that is limiting or repressing or preventing that is essentially a dying system.
Totally.
That's
thank
you.
Really awesome. I'll look more into that. That is absolutely spot on, and it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that other species throughout the entire universe go through the same process. You know, the same impulses that allow a species to actually just exist in harsh environments are not the same impulses that will necessarily bring it to a heightened state of consciousness or a utopian collective state. And a lot can happen while still operating under those survival techniques. You can build global empires, as we've seen in our case. You know, but once, you know, I always go back to the basis of self-actualization. And once our collectively lower issues and needs are met, like really, where are we going to head? So personally, I have become pretty obsessed with this idea of like, what's the next stage of our collective actualization? Because I think that's kind of the universe asking us to begin to imagine, you know, as Otto Scharmer says, you know, the emerging, leading from the emerging future. You know, there is this emerging future that's actually pulling us towards it. And it really, to me, it makes sense that it's a part of a larger evolutionary pattern that probably happens all over the cosmos. You know, so yeah, the butterfly makes, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Oh, there, thanks. Thank you, Theo. You know, I feel so blessed, and the world I know is so blessed by the unstoppable, you know, radiant optimism or optimistic radiance that you exude. And the last thing I would want to do is, you know, bring my son Saturn sort of heaviness to shadow to it.
Yeah.
And I know nothing I could do could do that to you, so I'm all right with it because I know that you're unstoppable, and that's great. But speaking of the butterflies, I read a story today that the and DNA, well, the monarch butterflies, you know, who have been migrating their thousands of miles every year. That they probably won't be within a couple of years. So our time, you know, what is our time? Our time is the time, for the first time ever, that the monarchs are going to, at least the migration is going to stop, and quite likely the monarchs themselves will die, and we know that they're not alone, right? I personally share your belief that we're not alone. The universe is chock full of life. There are many, I'm convinced, there are countless inhabited planets at various stages of their own evolution. And that we, although we may never meet them physically, that we share the same morphic field, and we're connected at a quantum level or at deep levels of spirit. And that gives me solace in a way to imagine that maybe, you know, we just won't make it here. That you know, it's quite possible that it's too late, and that the technology that you speak of, excuse me, embedded as it is in industrial growth society, the capitalist machine, patriarchy, and rampant psychopathy. Is going to do it in. So I'm just wondering what you do with that, with all of that.
Yeah, it's probably the most important and one of the most sober perspectives to have is that realization. And you know, and to me that kind of goes back to my original ideas that we're not like the crown jewel of the universe. You know, I see us as one of many attempts towards the universe knowing itself and understanding itself. And you know, lately, especially in making this film, The Future of Energy, we've spent a lot of time. We've spent a lot of time really focusing on the climate crisis and just the reality of the climate crisis, and it's been hard. It's been hard as a person to face this fact that it's you know, it's much worse than what most people realize, and it seems irreversible. We have no idea what's going to happen in the next 20 years. I mean, a lot can happen in the next 20 years, and definitely a lot will happen in our lifetime. And so, you know, when it comes to us and whether or not we're going to make it, I've actually had to come to peace with the idea that I'm not attached if we make it or not, to be totally honest. I think that in, some of my most amazing lucid dreams came to an end. And they were the most incredible things I'd ever experienced while I was there. And so maybe humanity, or all life, especially life that reaches phases that we're at right now, maybe they're just multiple dreams in Shiva's slumber, And if that's the case, and we're not going to last, 1,000 years and 10,000 years. I mean, Brian Swimme even says we're only 6% into our trajectory. We have 200 million years of theoretical time that humans should be able to evolve. That most species follow a 200-something year 200-something million year trajectory. So we're only a little bit into our potential. So if we have another galactic year, I guess that's what they're called, this 200 million year cycle. If we have another galactic year ahead of us as our potential, I want to at least envision that we could make it, that we can continue down that path. And that might mean that we're going to see the extinction of a lot of life on this planet. And then we're going to see some really difficult political issues in the next 20 years, especially, and 100 years. Or we might even see the total end of our species as a whole. But for me, that's not going to stop me from at least every day more and more finding a way to be more and more deeply in love with humanity. And really just honoring the fact that, that I'm human right now, and that we have all these incredible people in our community, and that, if this is it, like, what if this is the only day? Like, forget about the next 100 years. Like, what if this is the only day? One of the things I did when I used to do radio, I had a time where I was really delving into a lot of Buddhism, and there was a local Buddhist author that I was really fascinated by his work. He lives in Chico. And one of the things, I became really fascinated by death. And not like in a morbid way, but just this like impermanence sort of way, human coming to an end sort of way. And one of the things I did for this show, I had a half-an-hour show that I did this one week, and the whole time I had this beautiful sitar music playing in the background, and I just walked listeners through the idea that when they wake up tomorrow, tomorrow will be their last day. That it will literally be their last day on Earth. And then I just explored with listeners. I was like, what would you do? Like, who would you call? Are you ready to make amends with those people in your family or that long-lost friend that really hurt you that one time? Or are you ready to recognize when you hurt that person and actually face the impact you had on that person's life? Are you ready to apologize to them and swallow your pride and really like initiate that healing process? Because tomorrow is your last day. Like, you will not have another day. So what will you do? Who are you going to call? When was the last time you called your mother? Your father? And what can we do with that one day? And I tried doing it as an experiment, but the next day, guys, I cried the whole freaking day. I was wanting to be this detached, like, oh no, this is my last day too, it's okay. And I was like, wait, it's my last day? And then I found myself like calling my parents and sending all these emails and calling friends from high school and thanking them. And like thinking about a football coach that used to be a total asshole to me, but how much I appreciated him. And I couldn't get his number, but I like meditated on him being that way because it made me the man I am today, and just, it's that's the thing. I don't think we need to live in that state all the time, but I think if we have that capability to remember that every day is that day. And our species is, it's a beautiful species, so let's just honor together, let's just honor the beauty of it for while we have it, So, yeah. Matt and then Lucia.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk about the logosphere, because it's a phrase you've been throwing out there a few times, and I don't think you've sort of really gotten into it, so maybe how it interfaces with technology.
Did you have a question that was linking to Sean's?
Yeah, but that's fine. We can jump.
So I became really fascinated with the work of Teilhard in the past couple years. And I'm really interested because he's philosophized on some Christian theological ideas, such as like this re-emergence of Christ consciousness, or the re-emergence of the Christ. Sean's going to keep me in check because Sean's a total Teilhardian. I'm not a Teilhardian yet, but I'm headed there. This is my interpretation of it. So I became really fascinated with, I'm not a Christian. I grew up in relatively anti-Christian personal relationship, even though my family was Catholic and stuff. So, but over the years, with the use of psychedelics, with other transcendental states of consciousness, I became really fascinated with this idea that there is an underlying psyche of the universe that we can actually develop a relationship with, and that it's something that's permeating us at all times, it's permeating all of reality. And then I began to I came to PCC, and I found the work of Philo, and I found other Hebrew and Christian mystics. They were talking about the Logos. And I was like, what's this Logos thing? And I'd hear Rick say it, and the numinous nature of the Logos. And I'm like, this is so cool, I have no idea what he's talking about, And then so one day I just like sat down and wanted to understand the Logos. And then when I began to delve into it, I realized that it was actually a major component to things I had been looking for a long time. And so for anyone who's unfamiliar, the Logos, at least, there's infinite definitions of it, but I'll use Philo, the Hebrew philosopher, his definition. In a sense, it is a mediator between the eternal, unmovable God that's generating everything, and then the manifest reality. So it is what gives everything form, it gives structure. The easiest way for us to see Logos in living form is just to go out into nature, right? To see living things. We could say that's like a natural embodiment of Logos. But also, in that same sense, all of life, everything that's given structure, essentially is given structure through this Logos. But what's interesting is that it's not a static thing. It's as if it's a mediator between the unmanifest and the manifest. So when I began looking into some of the Christian mystical stuff and saying that like Christ was Christ because the Logos came into him, and I was like, that's a crazy idea. That's a whole philosophical thing that most Christians really don't grasp. This idea that we can, it seems like the Buddhists do. It seems like the Buddhists are like totally, without bringing it to the Mahayana necessarily, like they're really, I don't know, maybe Mahayana is. I can't speak on behalf of that. But really this idea that we can empty ourselves, we can empty our own egos and fill ourselves with the underlying generating forces of the universe, that we can realign our own psyche with these forces. And so I kind of set out to, as an experiment, saying like, well, if this is the case, then, Teilhard de Chardin is talking about this omega point, which he believes is sort of this transcendence of all human consciousness into this Christ consciousness, in which this Christ consciousness is permeating all of our reality. I proposed that there is actually a mediator between the noosphere. So in Teilhardian terms, we have the physiosphere, which is just all inert matter. We have the biosphere, which is all life, all living organisms, which kind of culminates, it centrates on the human psyche. And then we have the noosphere, which is like an envelope around our planet that's basically all of the psychic, it's a whole web of psychic energy that derives from the human in that sense. And so Teilhard is all about the noosphere. This idea totally changed the game for internet philosophers, for all sorts of people. So many people in the tech community use these ideas inherently without knowing the sources of these ideas. The singularity movement is essentially the omega point through technology, So we talk about that some other time. And so I became really fascinated. So I proposed this idea of a logosphere, this idea that the Logos itself, as part of the generating force of this generating psyche of the universe, is actually presenting itself to us on a regular basis, and that through synchronicity, even though Jung and Pauli mutually defined synchronicity as meaningful coincidence, right? As any sort of coincidence that actually brings meaning into someone's life. I'm taking it a little bit step further. Maybe Pauli and Jung took it to this level, but I haven't found it. In saying that actually synchronicity is the psyche of the universe connecting with parts of itself and making those parts of itself reflective through the participant that it's making it reflective through. And so when something synchronistic happens in our life, we're actually momentarily breaking that veil that's reminding us that we are actually God consciousness reflecting back on itself in more and more magnified forms. And so what I think that this logosphere is that it's an envelope of synchronistic consciousness in which the logos itself is presenting itself further and further to us. And then I think we can actually look at all the major cultural and philosophical strains as forms of the logos itself presenting itself in different forms, right? So every major philosophical movement, whatever their grand conclusion is, if it's from people who have really gone deep into a certain area, for all we know, maybe they're going and everyone's crossing the same threshold into the logos reality. But their karma, they're bringing their karma and their own lens with them. So scientists are seeing the logos as mechanic. They're seeing nature as mechanical because there's a mechanistic nature to logos also, right? Theologians and Christians and mystics are seeing the kind of personal nature of the logos through deities, through having relationships with Christ and through other deities and that sort of thing. So when I talk about the emergence of the logosphere, I think that we are actually entering into a phase in which synchronicities are going to increase because we're becoming more present with them, and that the actual underlying psyche of the universe is going to continue to communicate with us more and more consciously and not unconsciously. So again, we're crossing that threshold from the unconscious into the conscious, to where we'll actually have a working relationship with the psyche of the universe. I think, I don't know.
So I just had more of a comment in in reaction to Sean's just observation that we may not make it. And I just feel very strongly that we don't have the luxury of even thinking about it that way. I feel that we do have today, and we, hopefully we'll have tomorrow, and maybe things will die, and they are, species are dying, and they're being erased forever. But maybe it's like the example of the butterfly, that the beautiful example that maybe things are dying and we're transforming into something that we can't even see just yet, and that is going to be more amazing than we could even imagine. So the way I feel about it is a bit like a mother with a child. And I'm not a mother, but even if I know that the earth is not going to make it, I have to fight every day to make sure that it does. So it is diseased, it is undergoing a major transformation, and we're, part of the problem, big part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution. We just have to, I think, a lot of where the solution lies in is the realization of our interconnectedness and how we have each other, and we have so many tools, we have so many wisdoms, and so much history of greatness before us that I think we have to stay very optimistic and very positive, and just do that work, do that work, that we're here together doing this, and that there's many of us trying to make a positive change. So I just had to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luthia. I completely agree with you. Just to be clear, that I was in no way saying that I think that if we accept the possibility that it may be too late, that we should stop trying to make things better. On the contrary, just as you said, I mean, if a mother thought that there was no chance of saving the child, she would still try to save the child, because that's what a mother does. And similarly, regardless of whether or not we have a real chance at saving the rest of the Earth community, you know, there's a beauty and a passion and a meaning in doing whatever we can anyway, because it's intrinsically good and beautiful and meaningful to do so. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a there's a really beautiful scene from this Miyazaki film called Pompoko. Have you guys seen Pompoko? It's really a fantastic film. But it's about these tanukis, and tanukis are shape-shifting raccoons in Japan. And so anyway, their mountain is being taken over by the humans, and it's a really deeply traumatic situation for all these tanukis, because they're losing their lives and all these things are happening. And then so some tanukis are magical and they're shapeshifters, and others that are not magical and they can't shapeshift, but they're still really awesome. And in the end, not in the end, I mean, you should watch the film anyway, but one of the most dramatic scenes is when their village and their whole area is being destroyed, and all these tanukis decide to just get into a boat. There's a very Buddhist presence to this, and they just decide to play, and they play this, like, they all just get instruments and they all play this incredible music while they go over this waterfall, because they're dying, they're going to die anyway. And so they just turn it into this like beautiful celebration of death, and it's one of the most like, I haven't taken away any of the magic of the scene, because the film's, it's called Pompoko. It's a fantastic film, but maybe we should all, learn to play instruments just in case. Maybe last question, or okay, just last two questions. I don't want to.
We can't go to 8:30.
I don't want to take all you guys' time. You guys probably have tea or sandwich, crumpets or something to eat.
So I just kind of want to connect these themes. We talked about the logosphere, yep, and this question of imaginal cells, and if what we're seeing is in some kind of process of a kind of degeneration, which is actually setting the stage for a regeneration, yep, that could only occur through that deconstruction of what is. The logos seems to be, it's funny that we call them imaginal cells, because the logos itself seems to be connected to what we call the imaginal. And it presents itself usually, in a lot of as symbols, which are embedded in an imaginal, ground of the psyche that has taken certain forms in different cultures, but seems, to be representing something deeper. In my experience, I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for synchronicity. Absolutely not. It triggered me coming here, and even a task that I've personally set out to do that is in service of trying to help a positive transformation occurred around us. The most amazing numinous synchronicity I've ever occurred, and it's a long story. But this notion, this feeling sometimes that when these really numinous synchronicities occur, it calls to action or suggests something that helps, that it wants to help, that it cares. And I wonder if these imaginal cells are being guided in their own way that we can't quite imagine as humans, but by some kind of deeper intelligence. Maybe the same logos principle is helping guide these imaginal cells, saying, step by step toward what they need to do into this strange unknown as things seem to be falling apart, but it helps them piece by piece rebuild into a beautiful butterfly. Synchronicities played a huge role in my path, and I'm wondering if for you and things you've taken on of synchronicity has played a role in the assignments that you've taken on.
I mean, synchronicity has been so thoroughly presented to me, and I consider myself a pretty logical person who's trying to really see the world clearly. And I've had so many experiences with synchronicity that were just absolutely undeniable that, you know, I'm here right now because when I was having I was having my Saturn return meltdown when I was like 28 or 29 or whatever, I was up in Mount Shasta, standing in the parking lot, not having no idea what I was going to do. You know, I was kind of running this, helping run this cannabis rights campaign in Chico, but I was just needing direction. I was like, I had this Saturn return fire in my stomach that this would not subside. So I go to Mount Shasta to spend some time with my grandmother, and then I'm standing, you know, in the parking lot of their natural food store, and I get a call from a friend, and he's like, Theo, you should go. He's like, I'm looking at the PhD program at CIS. You know, you should go. And I was like, I don't even have my bachelor's degree done yet, man. I can't do that. You know, and he's like, I think they have a completion program. And I was like, oh, really? Maybe I could do the completion and then go get my master's. And I was like, oh, no, I can't do any of that. And before I know it, I'm like registering and like, you know, doing all these things. And then the most synchronistic thing about this is that I realized that it was his mother that had told me about CIS like 7 years before. And I like went there and obsessed over the website. And I was like, oh my God, consciousness studies, I'm totally, you know, and she like singled me out one day when I was like 20 years old. And she's like, Theo, you know, I can see school's a little bit difficult for you because you're not fitting into the right size peg or shaped peg or something. But if you want the type of environment that could really feed your soul and your consciousness in the ways that I think you might desire, CIS is really something to look into. But then I never looked into it because I didn't have my bachelor's. And then so it was literally her son that was calling me. And then he never got into the PhD program. He had a child instead. So if it wasn't for him getting excited about getting his PhD and then calling the one friend who was also excited about consciousness studies, you know, and then me actually taking action on it, I wouldn't. And then so many things have been brought forward at PCC and CIS. I'm a different person because of this institution and the community of people. You know, I mean, it's, yeah, that's a great example. So I'm a total believer. I think there could be a scientific principle behind it. I think there could be something that we're going to uncover more and more deeply, a spiritually scientific principle, you know, using Steinerian, spiritual science, whatever. Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. Synchronicity is a major part of the emergence of the logosphere. So I think synchronicity is going to be emerging more and more to where we can actually begin directing it, not intentionally directing it, but the more we open ourselves up to it, the more it fills that space, you know, as a form of communication, the larger cosmic psyche with the individual Atman psyche. So, you had another question? I hope I'm not boring you guys.
Thank you so much, Theo. That was amazing and incredibly inspiring talk. And I just wanted to say that I really gained some insight into the way that you described how, like, it's technology, you know, that really brought us to the Copernican revolution.
Yeah.
And like that set in motion modernity, which creates ultimately the shadow. Yeah. That we're striving to now reintegrate.
Totally.
And it's also technology that, you know, obviously the Copernican revolution recognizes we're not the center of everything, but also brought us the 3 outer planets, which bring into context the deep psyche, which is what you're striving to, or what you're pointing towards that we need to integrate, is the deep shadow. And astrology is exactly that. It's the cosmos reflecting the interiority of the human psyche, and so many of the things that you were saying were suggesting just that like that there would be this, you know, connutio and intelligence of like how the underlying logosphere would inform, and we'd be, you know, almost seeing it in each other, which is actually true. You can see archetypes in other people, and like when you get that, and I think it's possible for humanity to develop this as a function, as a perspective. It's like you speak differently to a Mercury-Neptune person than you speak differently, you know, to a Mercury-Saturn person. A Mercury-Saturn person Saturn is about logic and discipline and, you know, mathematics, and Neptune is more visionary and image-based. So like they're going to understand things in very different ways, and we already do this unconsciously. We're just not very conscious of it, but we're becoming more and more conscious of it, and it's really now dawning at this time because of technology, because of the Copernican revolution, because of the discovery of the 3 outer planets, that can kind of fill out the astrological pantheon and then potentially reconnect the human being through the logosphere, through the noosphere,
Yeah.
through our unconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Thank you again. That
Yeah.
was amazing talk.
Did you anything to add to that, or?
Well, I do want to say one thing that's not quite related to that, but I thought was kind of funny, is that when I was researching Teilhard, on 2 occasions, I found that Teilhard actually has a phrase for the logosphere. But I had already created this whole logosphere idea. And he calls it the theosphere. And like I learned about that like right before I went to Esalen with Max, and we were just laughing about it really, really hard. And I can't like come out to everybody and be like, you guys, there's this theosphere. Like, it's not me. But just so you know, Teilhard did actually theorize a next phase beyond the noosphere that was between the noosphere and the omega point. And so I think that he and I, obviously probably very different, but the more time I spent with him, the more I realized I really agreed with him in ways that, in a lot of the things that he felt and experienced and perceived.
Because you're from the future.
Yeah, I think we're all from the future, So, yeah, any other questions, or should we go drink some tea?
I have
Challenge me, Matt.
Well, I don't want to challenge you. I really appreciate the way that you're both bringing optimism, but also holding the complexity and the ambiguity of our situation. And you said at the beginning that it was comedy like Saturday Night Live and Star Trek, like futurism, that really shaped you as a young person.
Yeah.
But then just before, you mentioned this anime film that really brought home the beauty of tragedy and one way of responding to great loss is to see it as an opportunity to, play beautiful music or to really sink into the experience of tragedy as something beautiful. And when I think about the evolution of technology and the co-evolution of consciousness and technology, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
I don't know whether to be optimistic or terrified.
I'm trying to reduce the terrified part.
Yeah.
I'm trying to rehumanize it and put it in a larger cosmological.
Right. Because I think, as you were saying, as the light gets brighter, the shadow appears darker at the same time. And both, there's always two things happening at once. Technology is making us, it's amplifying our consciousness, as you said, but as a lot of media theorists have said, it also amputates consciousness.
Totally.
Various functions of consciousness become amputated and externalized, and then we lose our ability to reflect on their consequences. Like Whitehead has this great quote where he says that civilization advances by being able to accomplish more and more things without having to think about them. In other words, through technology, we automate so many things that, like, we don't have to think about where our food comes from. At least we, in America and Western European societies, we don't think about where our food's going to come from. We get to think about other things.
Sure.
That's only possible because of industrial agriculture.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of negative things that come along with sort of outsourcing our all the attention that used to be devoted to growing food.
Definitely.
So technology is definitely a double-edged sword, right? And I guess my question for you is about your love of humanity.
Yep.
And I wonder what is humanity if we understand human beings as that species which has always been co-evolving with its technologies. And if we look at technology's increased rapidity of innovation now, and the way that it's affecting human consciousness and human society, it seems to me that human beings will be unrecognizable if we survive, a century from now, because it's like we're already cyborgs. And how quickly we all got used to having smartphones. Not even used to it, but now it's a necessity almost.
Totally.
It's like a social necessity to have a smartphone. And 15, 20 years ago, no one even knew what a cell phone was.
Yeah.
You know, so what is it about humanity that you love, and what would it be? Are you worried about us losing that essential humanity as a result of this further coevolution of
Yeah,
technology and
basically, I think you've nailed the big question. I think that you're summarizing the big question that we are facing and that we've been beginning to face as we kind of moved further in the industrial age. And it, you know, so a part of my answer goes back to this idea that I really do think that we are post-traumatized species entering into a high technological phase. And so the big question is, will we be able to heal ourselves fast enough and successfully enough in order for irreparable damage to be avoided, you know? Great. So I don't know. I think that a part of me wants to say that we're not going to make it. I think that, so if technology is magnifying everything, and if its technology is also helping bring the unconscious to the conscious in certain ways, or maybe that's just an impulse what's happening anyway, you know, this goes along with this idea I have called technological actualization. And it's this idea that anytime a new technology emerges, it's going to reflect whatever actualized phase that it's emerging within. So our initial technologies were all survival technologies, right? And they completely reflected that. And then we moved into forms of expression. I hunted this. You know, this is where we get our water from. This is, you know. And then we moved into higher levels of actualization of our technologies were expressing higher states of consciousness. What's that? Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, you know, and then now it's like we have technology that somebody can hand me a book, which is incredibly symbolic, made through technology, but I can read pages on it and learn someone's spiritual tradition or someone's spiritual experiences, and that can transcend me to a higher state of consciousness, you know. But this would never have happened if they didn't learn how to mine this type of metal that produced these type of things, and that wouldn't have happened if they didn't learn how to refine weapons during this era of warfare, and that wouldn't have learned if they, you know what I mean. So it's this whole. I think technology itself is going through an actualization process. And so whether or not we're going to make it is going to depend upon how many of us want to infuse high consciousness in the technology culture, I think. It's totally uncertain. I have no idea. I wake up some days and I think it's not going to happen, and other days I'm like, yeah, it's totally going to, we're going to make it, we're going to do well.
Yeah. Pass it off to Max.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So Matt, thanks for bringing this up because it's something I think about a lot. And Theo, I think what you just said is perfect, along the lines with what we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
So Matt, that's one of my biggest fears about where technology is going, and it has been for a long time. And Theo is actually one of the people who has brought me around to the other side of that through our discussions and our debates. Because I think definitely earlier on in my life, I tended toward the naturalist side. But then as we have these discussions, it's like I do use technology, and I use it for what I think to be good things. But I think maybe not the answer to what you're asking, but kind of what I've come to is that our technology is going to unfold.
Yeah.
So really the question is, how are we going to participate in its unfolding? That's the question.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because if we don't participate, it's going to unfold the way other people want it to unfold.
Right. Yeah.
Make a comment. I would just make a comment that we have to remember not to take the map for the territory. I think that's just what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, on this question of whether technology is good or bad, I'm wondering if we can place that back onto the quality of consciousness.
That's great.
You know, it's like saying, is a knife good or bad? Is a thought good or bad?
Totally.
It's just, well, I mean, it depends on the intention using
Absolutely.
it. You know, it's merely an extension of us. And if our
Exactly.
values develop, the way we hold ourselves, our presence develops, we're going to use technology for our greatest imagination to discover space, view the world, and so on. And if our values don't evolve, you know, if our intentions don't evolve, we're going to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
So just to take it outside of is that good or bad and move into the being actually using the technology,
Yeah.
I think that's where the shift's going to take place. Yeah.
So on that same note, one of the things that that blew my mind as I was writing it, because I hadn't even thought about it before, is this idea that I want to bring technology beyond just the actual physical inert artifacts, and I want to bring it actually into the realm of life and manifestation. And I want to even posit that life is the technology of planets in different forms, and that planets will actually create new ways of expressing themselves through their living organisms. And so we could even say that the universe creates living organisms as ways, you know, if you even look at the way the Earth was created, it absolutely follows this technological actualization process that I was thinking about. The initial technologies, living technologies on our planet, were all biological. They were designed to just even out, make the planet livable. You know, the fungus coming to breaking down all the hard solids and chemicals to where all of a sudden soil can grow and plants could grow. And then organisms could come out of the ocean and all these things. And then if you actually look at it, you know, simple organisms that are just functioning to all of a sudden birds creating beauty through sound, like that's a different form of that's a form of actualization right there. And then other animals having, you know, thoughts of reality. Those are all different stages of the universe expressing itself through living organisms, you know. So I think you're totally right. I don't look at it as good or bad. I go back to this idea that we're bringing with us a collective post-traumatic state, that we're all healing because we're talking about it, and that if we can make it past this threshold of techno-fascism, that we actually might have something really incredible in the next 100 years or 500 years. You know?
Just to follow up on some of the things that have been said, I think there's a typical way that we think about technology and that we think about humanity's relationship to it. And one way of getting at that is to talk about one alternative species name for humans, Homo faber, meaning human as toolmaker.
Interesting.
Where what is essential about human beings is that we think that we can take matter and shape it into tools and use it for our own purposes. And what I think this perspective neglects is that as human beings shape the earth into certain technological forms, those forms then, it's interactive, and it transforms us as much as we transform it.
Yeah.
So what's tricky here is I don't think we want to get into that mentality, that it's really an industrial mentality, I think, that would suggest that human beings are in control of technology, but rather that in some ways technology is transforming us before we even recognize that it's happened.
Yep.
So I'm not really convinced that we can say it's not something intrinsic about technology, but rather the consciousness using the technology, because the consciousness using the technology is already shaped by that technology and wouldn't be what it is without its interaction with that technology. You know, so like we talk about language all the time and try to understand how it arose and originated, but do we, I mean, it's deeply paradoxical to talk about that which allows us to talk.
Yeah.
And to try to talk about any other form of media, you know. We can talk about things like radio and television now because we have the internet as a medium to give us some distance from those prior mediums. But when we try to talk about the internet, it's again this paradoxical issue of being immersed in the very medium that we're trying to talk about. So our consciousness is so shaped by the internet already that we can't step out.
We are the internet.
Yeah.
We're literally like the living internet right now. All of us are.
So in some ways, it's, you know, it's way more confusing than just like that. I wish it was as simple as, oh, well, if we just wake up and become more conscious, then we could use this technology in the right way. Technology is always going to advance faster than we can come up with the right ethical response to it. Our consciousness will always be behind the next advance in technology, or it seems that way, at least.
Yeah, essentially that's why I'm trying to get these conversations going amongst philosophical circles. So whatever it is that karmically all of our work is aligned towards, if we still have this type of thing as a part of what it is, because this is the world, this is what we're actually facing. You know, so if we're all willing to explore a little bit about what this stuff means and what it is we want to hatch and what it is that we want to help bring forward as a part of this conversation, then I think that's really, really something important that we all need to be involved in as philosophers and as change makers, you know, because then we improve the chances of things actually working out well.
I think that many shamanic cultures talk about things as spirits. So we talk about rock people and tree people and bird people. We talk about the living noosphere that's inside of those things. Yeah. And I think humans have made a grave error up until this point of thinking that what we create, the technology we create, doesn't have its own essence, just like a rock or a tree. Yeah. We see this a lot of times with parents when they make children, and they often think of those children as objects that they possess, rather than actually entities that have their own intelligence. So I think that if we began to think of things that we create as having and taking on a kind of ethos or intelligence or innate beingness, even though we've created them, we start to treat those things differently. I always like to joke that when I talk to Siri on my iPhone, you know, Siri, the AI, I always say please and thank you, you know, just to hedge my bets in the case of a robot apocalypse. Because I'm being nice, but I'm beginning to think, and there's this movie out, Her, right now with Joaquin Phoenix that talks about this, and I think that there is something around the idea of how we treat not just animals and not just people, but all of the thingness around us. As infused with that, whether you want to call it divinity or theosphere or the part of that collectivity that we're all co-experiencing here. I think it takes us to a different level of interactions.
I think that's going to be one of the biggest game changer of everything, is when we re-sacralize the entire scientific and technological endeavor, and we have people like us who can see the different perspectives. We can see the technologists, we can see the naturalists, and we're willing to harness ourselves as synthesizers. And then we bring consciousness and sacredness, and we're able to re-sacralize the entire technological endeavor. That's going to be a whole different thing altogether. And I think that's going to be really beautiful. And I have a lot of faith in that. I think it's going to happen. I think it's happening.
I think we have to have faith, not only because that's what moves us and propels us towards co-creation, but from a physiological perspective, if we're always in a place of fear and pessimism, our blood sugar, our blood pressure is being raised. Our immune system goes, takes a dive. Our heart rate speeds up. We live in that traumatic state. So we, by practice, have to learn how to physiologically function in a way that is both astute but also hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's how we will physically survive this.
Yeah. Cool. That's a really nice way to end. I think I just want to thank all of you for coming out and participating and choosing to be here, and anywhere else in the universe you could be, and you chose to be here. That really means a lot to me, and I hope I was able to at least bring a little bit of insight into some of the bigger conversations that we can all be having as a species. And in closing, I think that I'm really excited. I think that the sacralization of technology and using these incredible tools of communication to expand consciousness and to bring our species to the next level, and on behalf of the entire living system, entire living, Earth and living universe, is an incredible opportunity that we have, and it's really a gift to be here with you all, and that we get to take on that responsibility and create with it. So it's really exciting. Thank you.